Get ready for a wild ride as we unravel the unbelievable story of Joe Crouch. At first glance, Joe appeared to be a successful and respectable businessman. But behind closed doors, he had a dark secret that was tearing him apart. He was a gambling addict, and it wasn't long before his addiction took over his life completely. As the owner of a small lending company, Joe had access to a lot of money. But he couldn't resist the thrill of gambling and would often bet everything he had. He would even spend entire nights gambling with his buddies. And when a new casino opened near his office, Joe's addiction grew even stronger. But Joe's luck ran out when he lost 2 checks worth $80,000 that he didn't have the funds for. And in just one night, he lost a staggering $18,000. With mounting debt, Joe began to feel hopeless and desperate. He needed a way out. And that's when Joe turned to a life of crime. He robbed over 30 banks and commercial stores, resorting to theft and even murder to get his hands on the money he needed. But how did he pull off these daring heists? And what led him to this life of crime in the first place? All these questions and more will be answered as we dive into the unbelievable story of Joe Crouch. Get ready for a roller coaster ride of twists and turns. In May of the year 2001, upon returning home, Joe received a call from the prosecutor informing him that he would be charged with fraud, owing the banks approximately $85,000. The phone call was the beginning of the end for Joe. His heart sank as he heard the news that would change his life forever. He knew he had to tell his wife, but he never expected her reaction. She was devastated and couldn't bear the thought of losing everything they owned. As he watched her break down, a twisted idea crept into his mind. He had to protect her from a harsh reality, even if it meant the ultimate sacrifice. On that fateful night, Joe grabbed his gun and walked toward his wife, his heart racing with every step. With a cold determination in his eyes, he aimed at his wife and pulled the trigger not once, not twice, but 4 times. The sound of gunfire echoed through the house, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. As he stood over his wife's lifeless body, Joe knew he had to act fast. He wrote a letter to his children, explaining the unthinkable act he had just committed. He claimed that he had done it out of love, to spare his wife from a life of misery without him. But he knew deep down that it was a lie. Instead of running away, Joe called his brother-in-law and confessed everything. The police were alerted, and Joe's son received the shocking news. The police arrived on the scene and found Joe's wife lying in bed, with 3 shots to the head and 1 to the chest. The authorities quickly spread the word, warning everyone about Joe and his deadly weapon. The city was on high alert, and Joe was on the run. The chase was on, and there was no telling how it would end. After 12 long hours on the run, Joe had traveled over 300 kilometers, but he knew that he couldn't rest just yet. Despite his fear of being caught, he decided to spend the night at a hotel in Nashville, but under a fake name, J. Nelson. He told people he was a retired widower from North Mississippi. Joe had to be careful. He knew the police were looking for him, but he still wanted to enjoy his newfound freedom while he could. The next morning, he headed to Marietta, Georgia, but on the way, he spotted a police car. His heart was beating fast. He stuck to the speed limit and tried to remain calm as he passed by. However, Joe had another problem. He was running low on cash and couldn't withdraw any from his bank account. The only thing he had was his wife's wallet, which he had taken from her after he killed her. Joe knew it was risky, but he decided to use her credit cards to withdraw some money. At the bank, Joe's plan hit a snag. There was an issue with the withdrawal, and he was asked to speak to the manager. Fearful of revealing his location, Joe knew he had to act fast. He quickly fled to his car and headed south to Jacksonville, where he finally managed to escape the police's grasp. However, he was now down to just $25 and was running low on fuel. Desperate for money, Joe began planning his next move. He came up with the idea of robbing small shops, which often have only one employee. He waited for the shop to be empty before entering and pretending to look for something while he checked if anyone else was there. After he made sure that no one was there, he pointed his gun at the employee and ordered him to hand over the money without resistance, threatening to shoot him. The employee complied and gave him the money. After this easy heist, he took off in his car and headed for Daytona Beach. Joe Crouch's mind raced with thoughts of money and his next heist. After the successful heist, he made that netted him $300. Joe checked into a dingy motel, his mind already planning his next move. Soon, with a gun in hand, he was determined to rob again. He was hitting up small stores and gas stations, robbing them one by one. But even with all the cash he was accumulating, it was never enough. In November 2001, Joe wrote letters to his son and daughter. Knowing that the Daytona Beach postmark would reveal his location, he cut the distance to New Orleans, Louisiana, to send them by mail. The letter contained instructions for his son to take over his bankrupt company. The following day, his children informed the police and handed over the letters. After that, the authorities were on his tail. The FBI was now involved, and Joe knew that he had to act fast if he wanted to avoid being captured. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and Crouch knew he needed to aim higher, and so he set his sights on robbing a bank. Joe was a seasoned criminal with sharp intelligence. To avoid becoming an international fugitive, he carefully scouted out the perfect target, a local bank in Orlando, to ensure that he could pull off the heist without getting caught. He chose a bank where only women worked. It was a twisted and cowardly move, but Crouch knew they were less likely to resist. This was exactly what he needed. On December 5, 2001, Joe arrived at the bank and kept a watchful eye on his prey. He bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then he spotted an employee leaving the bank for the lunch break. This was it. This was his chance to make his move. Joe was no amateur. He had done this before, and he knew exactly what he needed: a gun, a rope, and nerves of steel. With these tools in hand, he calmly strode into the bank. He knew there was no turning back now. He made his way to the bank manager and pointed his gun at her, demanding her compliance. And he soon had all the other employees kneeling down. Joe knew what he was doing, and he expertly emptied the bank's coffers, but he wasn't done yet. He knew that he had to tie up loose ends, and that meant locking the employees in the bathroom. He did this with meticulous care, ensuring that they wouldn't be able to escape until he had made his getaway. As he made his escape, Joe knew that the fourth employee could return at any moment, and he had to move fast. After that, he returned to his hotel room with the stolen amount, which was $9,000. He turned on the TV and was surprised to see the news bulletin reporting the robbery with his clear picture. He decided to stay in his room until the next day, and then return to gambling and playing golf. Crouch knew he had to lay low. He spent the night in his hotel room, waiting for the heat to die down before returning to his usual pursuits: gambling and playing golf. As the dust settled from his previous heists, the thrill of the chase still burned inside him. He couldn't resist the adrenaline rush that came with robbing a bank. On the 2nd of April, he stole $12,000 from a bank called First Alliance, and in June of the same year, he robbed another bank in Jacksonville and got about $14,000. And on August 28, 2002, he set his sights on a new target: Crum Bank in Dandon City, Florida. With precision and confidence gained from his previous successes, he entered the bank with his gun drawn and demanded to know where the money was. The cashier obediently led him to the vault, where he filled his bag with approximately $40,000. After that, he locked her in the bathroom. But his joy was short-lived. Unfortunately for Joe this time, the employee was able to unlock the door of the bathroom and quickly alerted the police. 2 cars were nearby, and support was requested. As he was driving away from the street where the bank was located, he heard the police sirens approaching. Feeling that he had been caught, Joe felt the danger and confusion, so he decided to surrender. But the police cars passed by his car without noticing him, so he gathered his strength and continued driving until he felt safe. Finally, he stopped in an empty place. Several days passed, and although the thrill of the heists was still coursing through his veins, Joe had finally had enough of constantly looking over his shoulder, so he decided to take a well-deserved break away from the prying eyes of the police. He checked into a luxurious tourist resort under a fake name and began living the high life with the stolen money he had accumulated. His favorite pastime, golfing, became a regular part of his daily routine. One evening in February 2003, Joe got drunk and confided. He told them that his wife had been murdered, which left them in shock. But they didn't know that Joe was responsible for her death. In that same month, the couple was enjoying their drink. One of their friends walked in and handed them a newsletter from the Federal Investigation Bureau with a picture of Joe, who was known as J. Nelson. They were shocked, and they decided to inform the police. They told them everything they knew, including his fake name and his location. The police immediately coordinated with the FBI to arrest him without causing harm to anyone else. The plan was to isolate him to prevent any unexpected reaction from Joe, because they knew that he was smart and dangerous. On March 16, 2003, while Joe was in his hotel room, he noticed a police car parked outside, but he ignored it, and as a precaution, he decided to spend the rest of the day in his room watching TV. The SWAT team arrived at the hotel as night fell and quickly got to work. They located Joe's room and threw a flash grenade to disorient him. In that moment of confusion, Joe heard a loud noise and saw smoke in his room. He thought the hotel was on fire, but before he could react, a policeman tackled him to the ground, holding a gun to his head, and ordered him to stay down. However, Joe was arrested after 21 months on the run, following the murder of his wife. Upon his capture, he was returned to Tennessee to stand trial for first-degree murder. He knew that his only chance of avoiding the death sentence was to confess to everything that was attributed to him. Anyway, he was sentenced to 51 years in prison. Joe said that he is not remorseful for what he did and that he enjoyed every minute of his freedom because he knew he would be caught someday. And this was the end of the story of a man who turned from a successful businessman living in a happy family to a criminal who committed heinous crimes, and he is currently spending the rest of his life in prison due to his gambling addiction. Write your opinion about the story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And here are other videos that you may like.